Last week, in an episode called The False Color Problem, we examined the issue of the overuse of false color in astrophotography. The overuse of false color most likely began in 1995 when the Hubble team published a very famous false color image, the Star Queen Nebula, which we looked at in that previous video, The False Color Problem, and they published it in SHO, where sulfur was assigned to the color red, hydrogen to the color green, and oxygen to the color blue. This made for a gloriously beautiful image of the pillars of creation, a small stellar nursery within the Star Queen Nebula, also known as the Eagle Nebula. The image was beautifully eye-catching, there's no doubt about that, and it instantly caught the attention of astrophotographers, such as we were in 1995. In those days, we were using chemical photography, and what we could do was limited without extraordinarily expensive equipment. But nonetheless, as digital photography took hold and opened up vistas for the development of amateur astrophotography, the SHO palette really took hold within the astrophotography community, and soon it seemed like everybody was trying to emulate it. But long before the Hubble palette took hold, it was well known among both professional and amateur astronomers and astrophotographers of both ilks that there was tremendous use for false color within astrophotography. You see, many of the things that we try to image in space have very similar and fairly blend colors. For example, as we talked about last week, hydrogen and sulfur ions, which are significant components of emission nebulae, emit almost exactly the same color, with sulfur being just slightly deeper into the red than hydrogen. In fact, so similar, they almost cannot be told apart, illustrated in these two images. But filters carefully tuned to let only the light from hydrogen and sulfur ions pass through can be used to capture the distinct frequencies of light, and then a color can be assigned to them so that they stand out as very different. The advantage in doing this is that then the two different materials with their different assigned colors can be composited together, which helps to define the color contrast between the various materials within an image. And this helps everything stand out within an image. This is a very workable and legitimate technique, but as we talked about in the previous video, it's overusage within the realm of astrophotography. Overusage which results because, quite frankly, it can produce very beautiful results, but its overusage among both professional and amateur astronomers and astrophotographers has led to two significant issues. One is that the general public doesn't really understand what things in the cosmos look like. And among other problems, that feeds the nonsense conspiracy theories that are spurred on by cults like the Flat Earth movement. But it has even spurred astrophotographers, I think, frequently to shun the natural beauty of the cosmos and feel like the cosmos needs to be filmed in false color. As most persons who follow my channel and the images that I post on Broadband know, I work almost exclusively in broadband. Occasionally I'll add little narrowband to something if I feel it's going to enhance the image, but I do live in a dark sky region, so I shoot almost exclusively in broadband because broadband information can be captured much more quickly, and it also portrays the visual spectrum of light much more accurately, meaning that broadband images are much closer to what the human eye will actually see, were we to be able to look at those images through a telescope and see those images within the range of human perception. But the reality is, shooting with broadband comes with its own set of problems. It's not perfect, and it can easily be altered to be different from what the human eye would perceive. In fact, it pretty much always is. Let me illustrate. This nebula is LBN Lima Bravo November 645, otherwise known as the Fishhead Nebula, and I think it's pretty obvious why. And this is LBN 645 shot in unmodified broadband. I've done nothing to the color. I shot it using my Celestron 203mm Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, otherwise known as the Celestron C8, not the Edge model, at 1280mm of focal length using Celestron's reducer corrector. And it was shot through ZWO LRGB filters using a Player One Aries M camera. That's a monochrome camera. And what you're seeing is just shy of 10 hours of integration time or total shooting time, with 50% shot on luminance and 50% shot on RGB. By the way, that's an old imaging strategy for me. I no longer shoot that much RGB. These days, I shoot about 80% luminance and 20% RGB. It doesn't take much color information to fill out the color of a DSO, and the luminance channel is just so efficient at gathering the high-frequency information, the fine detail, as well as the fine light, shadow, and contrast information. The modification of the shooting strategy allows me to shoot much more efficiently, requiring even less integration time to complete images. But that's something to talk about in perhaps another video. I'm not a huge fan of PixInsight's spectrophotometric color calibration tools. I've tried them and find that very often one just ends up with washed out colors, so these days I use linear fit for all my color calibration. Now, all linear fit does is equalize the balance between red, green, and blue so that the images do not come out with a color cast like you would get with a one-shot color camera. One-shot color cameras produce images with that green color cast because 50% of their information is shot in green, while only 25% is shot in red and 25% is shot in blue. Well, we don't have to deal with that at all with monochrome cameras because we're choosing to shoot exactly how much of each color filter that we want. So whatever the percentage of RGB that I'm shooting, it's always 33% for each filter. So for a hard example, if I were to shoot a target for 12 hours of integration, I would only shoot 2.5 hours of RGB information, and of that time, 50 minutes would go to red, 50 minutes would go to green, and 50 minutes to blue. Now, in a perfect world, that should provide a color-balanced image, but we don't live in a perfect world. Occasionally a cloud might pass in front of the camera while it's shooting one of those color channels. Or the scene could change, which might incline the subframe selector or the stacking software to reject some images of one color channel or another. Meaning that, pretty much always, one is going to end up with a slight imbalance of color. The linear fit tool is used to balance the color, to get the color strength of the final masters from each color channel up each to about equal to one another. So that way, when they're combined to make your RGB full color image, the color is balanced and there's no color cast to remove with a tool like SCNR. So the only color balancing here has been done with the linear fit tool, combining the red, green, and blue channels evenly to give a color balanced image. This is one of the most accurate ways to get a color balanced image within the visible spectrum as the human eye would perceive it. Theoretically, spectrophotometric color calibration should provide a better color balanced image by balancing the image's colors by the light frequencies portrayed within the image, but in actual practice, I haven't found that works out very well. So this old linear fit method is still the method that I use. Apart from not modifying the color, I've developed this image in my usual way, which is to say, after combining all the masters, I then frequency split the final master, which divides the LRGB information into its high and low frequency components. I then luminosity balance the low frequency information to get a good balance of light and shadow throughout the image and portray everything well. And I apply the synergistic sharpening strategies that I have talked about in many other videos to clarify the sharpness of the image. So this is a pure broadband image of the Fishhead Nebula, and I think the problems with this image immediately become apparent. The color, while definitely there, is fairly flat, definitely doesn't catch the eye, it's not popping. Part of that reason is simply because this is how the objects in space look. But I am attempting to make a photograph of this object, and just as if I were to say, shoot a telephoto image of an owl in the forest or a low-light image of a plant, or photograph a microbe through the microscopes in the lab, once I have my subject, I am going to want to take development steps to emphasize the subject against the background. The Fishhead Nebula stands out against the background mainly only because it's brighter. Its colors, sure, they distinguish it from the dark space beyond, but they're just not remarkable. And part of the reason why is because this relatively flat-colored image is not great at emphasizing the contrast between different substances, luminosities, and structures within the image. And that is a key issue with broadband astrophotography, and it's one of the reasons false color photography became so popular. So, if I want to make the image of this nebula stand out, both against the space in the background, and also against the amorphous nebula structure to the upper right and lower left, and even within itself by developing color contrast so that the different chemicals and elements of which it is made really stand out, then I'm going to have to modify the color somewhat. Now, as I talked about in the previous video, the false color problem, I take the position that I want to reveal the astronomical object beautifully, but also as accurately as possible. So I'm going to bring out and differentiate the color in just a few ways. I'm going to enhance the saturation, also enhance the brightness of the color so that those colored regions show up better. And I'll typically rebalance the green channel, slightly raising it in the blue regions, which helps the blue pop by achieving a cyan hue. And I'll lower it in the red regions, which darkens the reds, helping them achieve a more burnished gold or sometimes even ruby hue. and avoiding the assignment of false color to any region within the image if at all possible. The sole exception being if I apply some narrowband data to the image to make certain structures stand out even further. But even when I do that, I will typically try to stick with that chemical or element's true visible colors by assigning that color to the narrowband information. Though I'm not entirely averse to making exceptions. For example, if I was working with an area where there was a lot of hydrogen and sulfur information close by one another, I would undoubtedly assign hydrogen or sulfur to the green color so that they can be contrasted against one another. Well, that's not entirely accurate. I'm trying to avoid overly technical jargon, but unfortunately, that oversimplifies the approach that I would take to resolving the color dilemma. So, more accurately, what I would actually do is separate out the high-frequency information from the narrowband master so that I can work very specifically with a concentrated structure. And let's say I had a lot of hydrogen information and a lot of sulfur information, which, as we talked about before, are both so close in red, the differences are almost optically invisible. I would probably do something like keep the hydrogen as red and assign the sulfur to a golden color. The reason being, sulfur on Earth appears yellow, and yellow is closer to red than green. What I'm ultimately saying is I will make every effort possible to stay as close to the true visible or optical color as possible. Because when people look at my images, the images that are done for art, not science, I do want them to see something beautiful, but I also want them to see something that is as close as possible to what is really there. So with this image, what I'm going to do is enhance the saturation across all colors, and then rebalance the green channel to help differentiate both the chemical regions and the luminosity regions within the nebula. Here's the color rebalanced image. The natural color within the image has been left as close as possible to the original color. The saturation has simply been enhanced, and the luminosity of the green channel has been lifted in the blue regions and pulled down in the red regions. This helps the areas with a lot of oxygen stand out against the areas with lots of hydrogen and sulfur. It allows areas with hydrogen and sulfur to show up as red and gold. And if you pop over to the Sky Story Astrobin and take a look at my image of the Star Queen Nebula and get in very close and look at the pillars of creation, you can particularly see the gold emerging around the upper part of the pillars. Gold is yellow, it's how we picture sulfur, and that's what I'm aiming for. And back here in our Fishhead Nebula, it has the red region show up in this lovely burnished red, or maybe one might say a red gold, which I like. It's the Fishhead Nebula, or maybe we should call it the Goldfish Nebula. This approach to color management is sometimes referred to as enhanced true color, keeping the colors of the astronomical objects within the range of their frequencies, and applying editing techniques minimally, just enough to enhance the color appearance, and changing things as little as possible to accomplish that. But ultimately, one of the problems with trying to shoot in true color is that true color frequently is visually unappealing. If one wants to make a beautiful image, editing will have to be done. And as we pointed out in the section on color balancing, some persons shooting in RGB or LRGB will attempt to color balance with strategies like spectrophotometric color calibration. Others, like myself, might prefer the older tools like linear fit. But ultimately, if one is going to try to attain true colors, the colors that you shoot, no matter what kind of camera you use, including even one-shot color cameras, will have to be balanced in order to get a good color output. Now, another issue that comes up when attempting to shoot true color, which is going to require either RGB or LRGB filters, is the dilemma of light pollution, a dilemma many, if not the majority of people face these days. Now, light pollution is not a subject that I cover in my channel because I live at a dark sky site, and pretty much except for my university days, I've always lived in the bush or the backwoods. I've never had to deal with light pollution. So, while I understand the concept theoretically, I try to avoid dealing with it on my channel because I have no practical experience dealing with light pollution, and I like to give advice only on things I have practical experience with. It's been my experience in science and also in life that often things people just happen to tell us or things that are theoretical don't hold up under actual testing and application. So, without practical experience with light pollution, it's a topic I avoid, but we need to touch upon it here. Unfortunately, light pollution is a fact of life for many astrophotographers, and the most effective way that I know to deal with that is by applying narrowband shooting techniques. Because narrowband filters prohibit the passage of the frequencies of light associated with light pollution, thus effectively allowing astronomers and astrophotographers to scour it from their images. But there are two dilemmas with narrowband techniques. One is the need for false color assignment, which we'll come back to, and the other is the technique's inherent inefficiency. This can easily be demonstrated if you pop over to the Sky Story Astrobin and take a look at the shooting time of my images and compare them to images of similar quality that were shot by others with narrowband. You'll see that very frequently, the better images shot with narrowband have 40, 50, even 60 hours of integration time, whereas I can acquire the same detail of information shooting from a dark sky site in LRGB in 20 to 25% that time. I think the average amount of integration time that I put into my images is right around 12 hours. I may spend a longer period of time on especially challenging images, like some of the deep field images I've recently shot of gravitational lensing and quasars halfway across the observable cosmos. But for most targets, I'd say roughly 12 hours, give or take a little bit. And it's just because it is much, much faster to gather information through LRGB, because the luminance filter allows passage of all the information coming from the visible spectrum. And R, G, and B filters each allow passage of roughly a third of the information from the visible spectrum, while a narrowband filter allows only a tiny sliver of information from any part of that spectrum to pass through. So RGB information and LRGB information are inherently much faster to gather, especially LRGB. It's remarkably fast compared to any other technique. The downside of broadband techniques is they let all light pass, including light pollution. So to do well with it, you have to shoot from dark skies. The other problem with narrowband techniques is there is literally no way to shoot true color with them. You will inevitably have to assign false color, even if you're aiming to use a false color palette that emulates true color. And that's because narrowband filters are capturing narrow slivers of light, which cannot relate the true color of what is being imaged. So to get anywhere close to true color, you have to use broadband techniques. But the true color problem is, while it's wonderful to aim for it, images created in true color will not pop, they will not stand out. They are unlikely to ever become the kind of images that appear in media or are sold as art, so to improve their visual appeal, they have to be enhanced. And this means there will be no way to stay 100% true to the true color of an image. However, this is the nature of all photography. In the end, professional photographers end up making adjustments to all their images because camera sensors don't capture information the way the human eye does. So developing has to be done to improve the image to bring it closer to what the human eye would perceive. And developing may be used to enhance differences such as areas of color contrast, light and dark, or coarse or fine detail to also bring out the best of an image. The true color problem forces us to ask, when do we go too far? When is the image not true to the original information? And that's an arbitrary concept, and probably each one of us have different thoughts on just where that place is. Some persons have even messaged me to tell me the moment you make any edit to an image, it's no longer a true image. Though, I'll be completely blunt here, those persons who think that really don't understand photography. Because the moment a camera captures light, edits have been done to the image. They've been done within the camera, according to how that camera's designers thought the information should be handled. There's literally no such thing as undeveloped photography. And this leads me to think that perhaps the most important goal is to be transparent about the procedures that we use and be true to the subject that we are imaging in so much as possible. Thank you for watching, and please leave your thoughts and comments on this topic below. I know it's a kind of a loaded topic for many photographers. We all have our own thoughts about it. And no matter what, whenever the night is clear and dark, get out there and shoot the sky.